That will turn to a panel of folks with living experience and their families, because really at UBC and the BC Centre on Substance Use, the lives of people who use drugs and their families are at the heart of everything we do. And I'm very proud to be part of an organization which has been founded and operates with people who use drugs and in partnership with them. So today we're going to hear from some folks with lived experience and living experience and people and their families. The session will be moderated. My friend Kevin. The session is going to be moderated by Riel Kapler, who is a postdoctoral fellow with us at the BC Centre on Substance Use. Dr. Kapler is studying the use of cannabis for harm reduction and problematic substance use. She has been involved in the cannabis field for over 20 years. And received the Governor-General of Canada's Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her work with medical cannabis, including foundational work with the first medical cannabis dispensary in Canada here in Vancouver. She's also a co-founder and advisory board member of the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers and is a board member of the Hope for Health organization as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kapler and all of our panelists.
Thank you. I am so pleased to be here at this really amazing symposium and especially to be moderating this incredible panel. This panel is about people sharing their personal experience with the overdose crisis and their perspectives on the potential use of cannabis as part of a larger strategy to deal with it. For me, my personal motivation came from listening to people and their lived experiences when I started working at the Compassion Club 20 years ago. And what I heard, and the thing that really struck me the most, was hearing from patients talking about how they were using cannabis in relation to their opiate use. And I recall having somebody, coming up to us and just being so thankful for having access to cannabis and being able to wean off their opiates and the positive change it had on their quality of life. And I was just amazed. I didn't even know that was possible. And that really motivated me all these years to keep going. And I heard about people using cannabis for withdrawal and how they would use these brownies we had, these amazing brownies, and that they would just be eating them during their withdrawal process and how that really helped them. So that's been a motivation of me, and wanting to really amplify those stories and those experiences through speaking, through advocacy, and through research. And really looking at finding ways to meet people's needs through legal law reform, through law reform advocacy as well, and policy reform. So as researchers, and I'd say the same for service providers as well as policymakers, we understand how important it is for our work to be shaped by people's experiences. And that is especially true, I'd say, when we're in the middle of a health crisis. If we want our work to be meaningful and successful, which I know we all do, our work has to be grounded in and informed by these experiences. So we are striving to do that by listening to people and engaging with them, and we are really fortunate today to have this incredible panel who are going to be sharing their experiences with us. And the four panelists, we have Karma LaRue, Claudette Cardinal, Scarlett, and Dean Wilson. And they're each going to speak for about 5 minutes or so and share their stories with us and their experiences and their thoughts. And then we'll have some time for more discussion and follow-up questions from the audience as time permits. So our first speaker is Karma LaRue, and this is Karma's first time sharing her personal experience with the overdose crisis in public. And we're really thankful for her for doing that here today with us.
Hi. So I've been asked to share my story, and I'm going to read it. It's just a bit easier for me because it's my first time speaking in public. So you can see that's my daughter. So my 19-year-old daughter, Gemma, died of a fentanyl poisoning on May 6, 2017. She died alone in a Vancouver coastal health recovery house. She was not found for 12 hours. Okay, Gemma had a beautiful childhood on Lasqueti, an island off the grid in the Strait of Georgia. We lived in a close-knit community. She lived in nature, and she was safe to walk for miles to her friends' houses, to cruise to the beach, to adventure in the woods. She actually went to school with sheep grazing outside of the classroom window. It was a bit of a protective bubble. Gemma grew up in a middle-class family with all the opportunities at her fingertips. She was loved and adored and supported in all of her endeavors. Her brother Isaac and dad Sam are also here today. Gemma became an incredible artist. She loved creating music and DJing. She filled the house with music. She was a gifted painter and left behind an incredible amount of art which covers our walls. She was deeply compassionate and a loving person. We moved to Vancouver when Gemma was 16, and that's when everything changed. She was introduced to heroin in grade 11 at her new high school. As soon as we found out, we began to navigate the healthcare system and found there was shockingly few support services available for youth who use opioids. We got her the best support we could find. But the system failed us at every point in the process. Counselors, physicians, day programs, pharmacists, youth residential treatment centers, mental health workers, and psychiatrists. The failure of this broken system eventually led to her death. We went through a few years of hell, and when she turned 19, she could finally access adult treatment. With her permission, we put her into a private high-end treatment center licensed by Vancouver Coastal Health. We were so relieved she was finally in the hands of people we thought were the experts. After 90 days, they recommended that her risk level was low enough that she was ready for transitional recovery house. This was the fatal mistake. What we know now is Gemma was actually at a very high risk of relapse. After 90 days of sobriety, she had dangerously low tolerance. On her first day of freedom, after 10 days at the transitional recovery house, she relapsed. I am sure she was full of shame for disappointing us, and she couldn't say, "Mom, I'm going to relapse, I need your help." Instead, she scored a poisonous dose of drugs. She died alone in the facility. What could have saved Gemma? She tried Suboxone, but it was not delivered effectively, and it did not work for her. Maybe if she had access to another treatment, she could have managed her cravings. Maybe if she had better access to harm reduction, her brief relapse, so common among people living with opioid use disorder, would not have killed her. If she had access to a safe drug supply, her last dose would not have been poisoned by fentanyl. We do know that society's stigma against people who use drugs doomed my daughter. Gemma was treated like she had a moral failing. She was treated like she could get over it and just be strong. But having a substance use disorder is not a moral failing. If she was treated like a young woman with an illness instead of like an addict, maybe she would still be alive. We know that abstinence-only based approach to substance use, addiction, and overdose is failing. It works for some, it doesn't work for everyone. We know the drug supply is poisoned. People who use drugs, people like Gemma, are dying. Without enough harm reduction, without a safe supply, we are choosing to let people die. So I want to tell you more about why I'm actually here today. So Hillary Black is the Chief Advocacy Officer for Canopy Growth. She's right over there. The year before Gemma died, she lived with my family part-time, and we shared a dog named Ringo. She got to know my kids well, and Gemma and her spent a lot of time hanging out on my back porch in their PJs. When Gemma died, Hillary moved into my house to help my family through this terrible time. She saw the unimaginable grief our family went through. Hillary's grief inspired Canopy Growth to fund this professorship with the hopes of supporting solutions to the overdose crisis. Then I met MJ. He's right there. He's a brilliant scientist and one of the most compassionate people I've met along the journey. I feel really good that this research is in his hands. He is so connected to the human aspect of the crisis. MJ asked me for permission to name the clinical trials Gemma to honor her experience. Building a body of evidence around cannabis as a harm reduction tool is an important step towards society and policymakers understanding the harms created by prohibition and stigma. I hope the research done in these clinical trials puts more tools in the hands of people who use drugs, their families, their care providers, so that we all survive this crisis. Gemma now is part of the change that needs to happen to save lives. I'm here sharing my family's story because we need to do everything we can to help make change happen. In the words of Mom Stop the Harm, an amazing network of families who've lost a loved one to drug-related harms, we must decriminalize possession so people don't die alone, driven into the shadows by a judgmental society. We need better and more treatment options delivered compassionately and effectively, including substitution therapies. We need a safe drug supply provided with medical and support services so that relapse, a natural part of recovery, does not kill. We need cannabis accepted as a harm reduction tool by medical professionals around the world to save and improve the lives of people living with substance use disorders. We need to build the case for making this affordable and accessible. So we are a room full of people with power and privilege. I'm asking you to do everything in your power to help make these changes happen too. Thank you for hearing our story.
Thank you, Karma. Thank you for your courage to get up on the stage and share your story with us for the first time. And while we all know how important these experiences are and these stories are in shaping the work we do, we also have to think about the emotional work and energy it takes for people to share their stories with us. So thank you again, Karma, and thank you to all our panelists for doing that. And thank you to everybody else who takes the opportunities and makes the opportunities to share their voices with us. And we really need to be listening to them. It's a privilege and honor to hear from another incredible woman who takes the time and energy to share her experiences and stories with all of us so that we can all be part of the solution. Claudette is from the Cree Nation, a longtime HIV/AIDS survivor and thriver, and a community investigator with the Canadian Observational Cohort Collaboration at the BC Centre of Excellence on HIV/AIDS. Claudette, when you're ready.
Good afternoon. I'm just touched by this courageous mother. I, too, it'll be 5 years in March that my daughter passed away, my oldest, who has made me a grandmother of 6 grandchildren, 5 boys, 1 granddaughter. And this is why I involve myself in research and tell my story. I, too, was, in my past, I've been 20 years sober, 24 in recovery. The last time I used was downtown Eastside in the alleys for about 3 days. It felt like the 2 years that I was actively using in my earlier teens, 18 to 20, when I was actively using. In '95, when I came to Vancouver and got lost for 3 days and turned in my ticket and sold my jewelry and everything just to get high, and injecting whatever was injectable at the time. I didn't really use cannabis until later in life, like about 5 years later when the program came out. That's when I switched over. At this point in time in my life, I use it in different therapies, all edible. Everything that everybody talked about, I am my own doctor. I smoke it, I vape it, I eat it, I make a rub that's very therapeutic for my constant pain that I'm in, chronic. I would debuff the doctors and all that, the scientists that say that, you get all messed up and, well, that's if you're smoking too much, maybe. But for me, it's a daily maintenance of how I use it. And for the most part, it keeps me away from falling back on the shit that can kill me. And that's why I always keep in my thoughts, in my memory, of the times that when I was using and there were no people, there was some people, thank God, that they were around when I OD'd on MMDA and I shot up over 35 units, and it was so dark that I couldn't even see my own blood mixing in. And I got up and I got to the sink and puked and then passed right out on the floor. And I don't know how many hours later I wake up to a room of 3 men, not knowing what the hell just happened to me or if they had done anything to me. And then that's the experience that I keep vivid and it keeps me away from. And with the help of medication, my daily dose of prescribed marijuana, that's my harm reduction. It keeps me away from leading back into my old ways, and my old ways are very destructive. And when I'm using cannabis for the medicinal purposes that it's intended for, I'm a healthy living person. I think I tried doing the lesser of evils a few years back in 2009, and I picked up, instead of injecting drugs that I would have had to say goodbye to all my supports then, I took up drinking. And drinking for me was a big thing because that's what I tried to do to get rid of the HIV back in the day, and it didn't leave me. So I thought that, okay, well, that's not the thing to do. So I was looking for different alternatives, different therapies I've tried over the years, and it all comes back to medicinal marijuana. I've lived over 25 years with HIV, and I've done experiments on myself, and they all point back to a healthy, maintained lifestyle compared to falling back. And I'm not on any pharmaceutical drugs. It's all strictly herbal, natural, other than the HIV meds and other, like thyroid and some other pills. I'm only on 3 different medications, and that's it. I use my cannabis for all different types of pain that I'm in constantly. The side effects from certain medications, now they're a lot more tolerable, I guess. But then with that means that you have to have something that's going to counteract that side effect from the toxins that the medication that I'm on affects me. I've lived through the buffalo hump, and in the HIV world, that's the lipodystrophy, the distribution of the fat inside one's body, and it's different for men and women. For me, it was in the back of my neck, and I had that surgically removed liposuction, but it took being denied and then coming to the lovely big city of Vancouver. Back then I was on Vancouver Island when I was denied, and then I came over here to Oak Tree, and I had a lovely doctor who's now retired advocate for me to get that covered. I think I was traveling back and forth because my daughter had passed, and I was doing all kinds of things court-wise between Vancouver and Alberta. And then in that time period, my biological dad's mother passed away, so I was dealing with that and then trying to register my daughter with Northern Affairs in Edmonton. She wasn't properly registered as being passed on. I found that bizarre. There's so many things that are so bizarre in that case, but that's another show, another panel. So the path that I've taken with medication and how I deal with my doctors today is a firm belief that I am my own advocate and have been my own advocate since I left Alberta and came here, because of the fact that certain doctors back in the early days were like godlike, and they thought they were the only one and that you had to listen to them and adhere. It took me a long time to adhere to the Western profession telling me what to do. I was not fond of being told what to do. And then when I presented to them, because as an Indigenous person I know my body. I know what works for me. And then you have this person of higher authority belittling you because they don't believe in your beliefs or your methods or how you're going about it. And so I fire them. I don't need that negativity in my life. And I just want to say thank you all for being here, and let the research begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudette, for sharing your thoughts and insight and your heartfelt wisdom and, the context of your life and how you're using cannabis for different purposes. So we just heard from two mothers who lost their daughters to overdose, and this health crisis that we're in is hitting youth very hard, and we are really grateful for Scarlett being here today on our panel to bring a voice of the youth to us. Scarlett is a Youth Peer Research Associate with the BCCSU's At-Risk Youth Study. Thank you for being here.
So bear with me. Again, like she said, it's my first talk, and I'm reading notes off of my phone. So I'm Scarlett. I'm 24 years old. I'm a single mother of a 3.5-year-old. I am 4 years clean in 2 days from now. Thank you. I don't know, cannabis has always been a part of my life. I grew up with my mom working at BCCS and growing for them, and then a lot of the time after school, she'd bring me with her to work. So I grew up in that community from a very young age, like 3 is the earliest I can think of for memories I have from there. And I got to meet a lot of people, and I got taught that all the drug war propaganda wasn't to be believed and how it really was. And I got taught a lot of the, science behind it growing up and actuality of things when it came to cannabis and other drug war related stuff, I guess you could say. Around 11 or so, Child and Youth Mental Health decided to put me up a psych that got me on Dexedrine and a couple different sleeping meds I had to go through throughout the years, and that around 13 turned into addiction. I started abusing my medications, Dexedrine and Ativan. And I also started using cannabis on my own around that time, and I quickly found within a year that it was working better than the pharmaceuticals were, and the pharmaceuticals were causing a lot of problems. So I talked to my mom, and we talked to the doctor prescribing me the pharmaceuticals at that point, and we basically got me my first dispensary card when I was about 14 years old, which did me amazing. Now, I was still abusing my pharmaceuticals at the time, and I was in and out of detox throughout my teen years. And it went from pharmaceuticals to meth to eventually heroin by the time I was 16. At 16, I went to a rehab center called Portage, which is now shut down. It is about a 6-month to a year-long program, depending on how you took it. If you didn't take it serious, it took longer, which unfortunately in my case, it took 9 months. Now, my mom was good family friends with Dr. Paul Hornby, who before I got in, helped with my psychiatrist fight Fraser Health to get my Canacaps in while I was in there. So thankfully, when I was in Portage for 9 months, I had Canacaps to help me, which helped majorly with my recovery when I was in there. I had people point out, my mom and other people we knew that is the most high functioning they've ever seen me when I was on my Canacaps. It took me a couple of years to start cluing in, realizing that, but now I do see that too. I got out of rehab after about 9 months. I was at 16. And I had about a year and a half clean, and I met my ex at that point, and I relapsed basically. I was doing good in school, but they found I was using, so they kicked me out, of course, because I was using. They didn't like that. And after that, everything just kind of spiraled. I went from using slightly in a minor relapse to full-blown addiction again, on the streets, IVing meth and heroin, being homeless. My relationship with my ex became very abusive quickly, and I spent the next couple of years just probably at my lowest point possible. And after a few years of that, I found out I was pregnant. So I kind of panicked, and I didn't know what to do. Nowhere could really help, so I called my mom. And I was like, what the heck do I do? I'm on the streets, I'm using, I'm pregnant, I'm lost, I don't know where to turn. And it took her a bit. She looked into it, and she found a program at BC Women and Children's called First Square, which is for women pregnant addicted, and she got me in there instantly, thank God. And I got clean that night. That evening that I got in there, I got on a low dose of methadone, and within that week, I started taking my Canacaps again, and I have been clean since, pretty much. And just doing my thing, working on myself, trying to build my life back up. My daughter is healthy and fine. The worst that happened was minor withdrawals for a few days. She didn't need weaned or anything. She's now happy and doing great in life. And yeah, so am I. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much, Scarlett. I was working at the Compassion Club, and I actually remember you as a little girl. It was amazing. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your different, interactions with the medical system. And yeah, thank you. So Dean Wilson is a longtime activist in the downtown east side. He works with the BC Centre on Substance Use on peer engagement. Dean has been fighting for the rights of drug users for so long, advocating for their health and their dignity, and since long before this current healthcare crisis that we're in, and has just a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with us. We're really happy to have you here today, Dean.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I was born on the lands of the Swampy Cree, and I also take care of business on the lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. I also want to acknowledge all four of my panelists for their extreme courage in telling their stories. It was many years ago that I first picked up a mic and started talking, and I started crying. In fact, and Ann Livingston quickly threw on a movie and saved my bacon. But it's not easy, let me tell you. I'm well versed now. I want to sort of take you full circle with my use with cannabis. In 1972, I was arrested twice for possession of cannabis. Back then, there was no such thing as a kiddie justice system. You went to jail. It happened twice in my life that year. I was a straight-A student, and when I got out of jail the second time, there was not a high school in Ontario that would take me back. And all my friends were told by their parents that they were not allowed to see me anymore. I became an incredible pariah. I had been very familiar with opiates before that, but at the end of that year, due to anxiety, depression, and everything else that happened following those two incarcerations, I became fully entrenched in heroin addiction, which continues to this day. It's so funny that all these years later, it's now legal, but it's the most illicit legal thing I've ever seen. But it amazes me of how, and I was by no means the only one who was affected back then and who had their lives completely changed because of these bullshit laws that continue with other drugs. And I know we're going to start talking about research and how cannabis has a part to play. For so long, it was only Israel that was doing any kind of research into the cannabis and the opiate world. Now we're getting more and more, but we need tons. Because this is the reason why I so support research. I was one of the plaintiffs in the Insight supervised consumption site trials. It took 10 years over 3 courts where we finally unanimously won so that supervised consumption was written in stone as far as our Constitution went in this country. But the thing with about 6 months after the first court case, Judge Pitfield, who ruled the very end, the BC Supreme Court, that I met him at a dinner party, and I asked him, it was kind of weird, I asked him, when did you go onto my side? Because you're known as a very conservative judge. He said, well, all that research from Europe, I discarded immediately. I read the research from Vancouver and Canada. I then compared your affidavits, yours and Shelley's affidavit, and I made my decision then. And I thought, wow. Before that, I thought research was a very voyeuristic type thing, because in many cases, people had come to the downtown east side, got their PhD, and off they went. They did not leave our community in the same or better place, and to me, that is bogus research. All research must leave the community in at least as good shape as it when it came. If not, try to apply that research and make it a better place than when you came. But as I say, it's this full circle of life with drugs in me, and I don't want to say it ruined my life, because, at 64 years old, I'm finally happy. It took me till I was 55, and cannabis has allowed me. And here's another thing, when you go to the downtown east side, you see people that have no options. They're homeless, they're illiterate, they have none of anything that you take for granted. And so to pick up a joint and to smoke it and to have maybe 2 or 3 hours where they don't have to cope with the bullshit of the world and just get to sit there and be them is incredibly appealing to me, to see my community being able to get there, because they don't have anything. And for the law to say that that was illegal for so long just burned my ass. And it's the same with all drugs. Only the numbers have been quite static for many years. Only 5 to 10% of people who try drugs or alcohol become addicts or alcoholics. But that means that 9 out of 10 people who try drugs have no problems with them. They use them. They go back to being soccer moms and researchers at BCCSU and everything like that. So to take something away from some people, it's a complex world out there, and many of us who grew up, when I grew up there, there wasn't even color TV. We used to sit around the radio on Friday nights. It is a fast-moving world that a lot of my people my age can't cope with, and they use pot to do that, and cannabis, sorry. And as I say, to still make it like the question I asked, it's still shameful in many ways if you use cannabis and you have another addiction, because, as I said, you're just changing deck chairs on the Titanic, don't you know? And it's all this way of thinking, and Dr. Blumenthal said, we need a complete change, and it's you that have to change, not me. I need opiates like you need oxygen. You need to change. And when you leave this place, you should take what you've learned, and when people say stupid things, call them on it. Say, that's bullshit. That's not true. That's all I got to say.
Thank you so much, Dean. I want to follow up on a few of the kind of themes that came up from all of your talks, and then we can have some questions as well. So one theme that came up for me was around autonomy, and that's something that Claudette was bringing up in terms of being her own doctor, and other people were talking about that, how they, with cannabis, there's been so much, it hasn't been legal, it's been hard to access, and people have to kind of take that into their own hands. And that's something when we talk about research and service provision, how challenging has that been for people to navigate access to cannabis? And I don't know if who wants to start answering that, if anybody has anything to say about that.
Very difficult. The new legalization and being a person that uses it daily, there's different sources, and when I go out to get cannabis, because I don't have a designated grower, I've been searching and I'm, working on that. But when I go out to certain compassion clubs, it's like before the legalization, people were on it. People knew what the dosage was, the THC levels, everything in it. I go nowadays, and it's like young little person, not to diss the millennials in the room. You know what I'm getting at? And it's like, and they're not versed it. They're just here to sell you this bud, and they're not even telling you. Like, I'm a connoisseur. I like high THC, and they can't even tell me. I tried one strain, it was like bunk, and then I'm like going, and I paid high price for that bunk. Right? And I'm like, and it wasn't effective for me. And then there's no return policy. Like, very rare that there are compassion clubs that will allow you to return their product if it's not working for you. I remember one time traveling, and just a little blurb. I used to be, I still have your Compassion Club card, and I also have Philip from Vancouver Island Compassion Club, and I used to say that I've got dual citizenship because I've come from Vancouver Island and come to Vancouver to access medical cannabis back in the day when I had to buy it. And that's the biggest thing too, is the price of it. And for people that are on limited income and all this and that, it's a high price, like $13 a gram. Who can afford $13 a gram? Like, and maybe 2-3 joints. Like, I need those 3 joints and then some more, right? Because it's not effective. The different strains that are out there for people. Yes, it can be, it's all finding the right strain for the right individual and then the right dose, right? Somebody, like, my cookies that I make would floor a normal person. They can't take the whole cookie, right? That's why you start with little small doses, like the gentleman said this morning, Neil. And I'm like, where was I when I'm like, 3 years I've been suffering to try and find medical cannabis, right? But that's the difference in the hardships of all these people that they don't understand. They're dispensing it. They just want the money, the income. But for the individual interaction with the patient, the customer, it's like, I just want to say those are some of the hardships out there.
And in terms of what is affordable, and what is the products that are needed in this context, and what's affordable. How like, Dean, do you have anything you want to say about affordability?
Well, like if this is not going to be a criminal thing anymore, and it is the medical model, then why isn't it being prescribed and covered under pharmacare?
Exactly.
Like, fuck, man. Like, are you guys kidding me? Like, this drug thing, the stigma attached to it is still there. As I was mentioning, you go into a detox and you want to go smoke a joint, and they shame you. I know people that won't even go up to the meds counter because they feel so badly about going up there and asking for a drug that they need. But if it is a medical issue and it's no longer criminal, then prescribe. And I'm talking about all drugs.
Affordability and coverage under the healthcare system is
like
so
every
important.
other
That's
therapy
right.
out there.
And it is in the context of health. One thing that Scarlett said that really stood out for me was around getting access to the Canacaps while you were in recovery. And I know that a lot of the programs are abstinence-based, so that was
Paul
quite...
fought hard. He had to fight Fraser Health with my psychiatrist at the time majorly for that. And they had strict rules. It had to be like tested and blister packed, and it had all labels like an actual pharmaceutical did. And it had to be like as legit as you could possibly make it, basically. And even then, like, he fought hard to get it. I appreciate him so much for doing that for me. I mean, he set a precedent there that is like major, if you ask me.
This is why the sharing these stories is so important, because it's happening for one person who had this amazing advocacy for them, but what about everybody else, and why does that not apply to everybody else? Like, that has to be implemented at a policy level.
Story as an example to fight to get your own cannabis in. I don't think smoking would be allowed, but Canacaps, use my story, go ahead.
one of the things that, that's brought up a lot, you're going to use a drug to substitute. When I always tell this little bit of a joke when I say, what do you call a supervised consumption site for alcoholics? It's called a bar.
It's a bar.
Why is, as soon as we cross over that it's no longer alcohol, there are so many drugs that we consume, like, you can stuff bonbons down your gullet until your heart is about to fall out of your body, and you're still taking it and treat it well, and you've just got heart disease. But if that person comes in with a substance use disorder, we are absolutely still shamed. And it's not always by the professionals anymore. It's by the average Joe who gets hired there who think they know better than everybody, and that they bring their baggage from their life and they throw it onto us. Well, send the baggage to Goodwill, get off your bullshit high horse, and start treating us like normal people who need therapy.
Thank you. So we have about 5 more minutes. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, if not right away, I can ask some more questions. One thing I also found, really intriguing is about, the use of cannabis as a substitute for sure, but then there's all these other, these other ways that cannabis is being used, not directly as a substitute, but that actually also impact the opiate use or the crisis. Claudette, mentioned using it for medical reasons and for pain relief, and that otherwise would have maybe, led her into using other substances. And Dean also spoke about using it just to cope, with all the deaths, and that kind of, brought to mind the, guest speaker, and, how he was saying, people are being pummeled down here, they're getting kicked in the head, and, and why can't, also just like, why can't people feel good? Like, why do we have to, talk about restricting THC so people don't get high? Like, maybe there's a role that feeling good.
Like no cannabis stores allowed in the downtown east side. What a joke. Are you kidding me? You can walk about 5 feet in here, up, down, rock, but you couldn't go in and legally buy marijuana. Like, are they protecting us from something?
So as kind of any final thoughts from the panelists about what you would say that some of the research priorities might be, like if you could have all of the researchers in this room focus on something that would be really helpful, what would you like to see the attention focused on?
I didn't really mention it because I kind of quickly went through and missed what I actually wrote down, but I think more should be looked into using cannabis and kratom together, because at one point I used that before I went to rehab, and it was probably one of the easiest and best detoxes I did. And I mean, the kratom and the cannabis together made me really tired and sluggish the whole time, but I was able to sleep the whole week away. And like I said, it was one of the easier detoxes I've ever been through, other than being on methadone the last time I got clean, which you don't really detox on. So yeah, kratom and cannabis I think is a major one to look into together as a tool to help people get clean. Yeah.
I think that that the research that's needed, especially in the opioid situation, is from the start to beginning. People who could use it, trying to prevent themselves from getting that step into addiction while they're addicted, while they're trying to detox. All this stuff is needed, because I don't know people who say they're withdrawing, it's like a bad cold. Yeah, tell me about it. It's not a bad cold. It's the worst thing that you can have happen to you. It's just horrible. And if that cannabis can give 2 or 3 hours relief, then we've got to start looking into that, because we want people staying in detoxes and recoveries, not going in and leaving. And we need to know what is actually helping. Like Dr. McCallum was saying, maybe the THC isn't the right thing for some, but the CBDs are. And we need to find that balance. And the different balances as we're in different stages of our addiction. Because our bodies change as we are, as I say, I need opiates like you need oxygen. I'm sure I would need something different than when I first started. But we need that research, and we need it made in Canada.
Something I've had an idea about for positive action, not intervention, because that's just people coming upon you. So positive action is something that probably would have saved my daughter's life, is that dealer should have been trained on naloxone, and then he could have probably revived her in the bathroom. She could have still been living today.
Yeah, that's, some services. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Carmen?
I mean, I've learned a lot about cannabis recently, and I wish I'd known, then what I know now, but I wish my daughter had an option, especially in recovery, when she had those feelings of wanting to relapse, that she had other options. And I'm looking forward to the research and possibly going into that area. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our panelists today for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you, Riel.